After the funeral, I carried my ex-wife's exhausted sister inside, and I swear to God I only meant to lay her down and leave. My name is Emmett Calloway. 4 years ago I signed papers that said I wasn't Nora Prentice's husband anymore, and this morning I sat in the third row at her funeral, while a pastor called me the former spouse in front of 200 people who don't know why. My 6-year-old daughter, Junie, cried into my shoulder through all of it. My mother-in-law wouldn't look at me, and the only person in that entire church who knew what those divorce papers actually cost me was standing at the back in a gray housekeeping uniform, holding a guest book nobody thanked her for. Delaney Prentice, Nora's little sister, 29 years old, third shift at the Weatherly Hotel, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and then straight to her sister's bedside for 14 straight months. She came to her own sister's funeral in a hotel maid's uniform because it was the only pressed thing she owned, and because she had a shift at 11 and no intention of missing it. She was going to work. After burying her sister, that woman was going to go clean rooms. So I drove her. And halfway there, my ex-wife's exhausted sister fell asleep mid-sentence, with a foil-wrapped plate still in her hands, and when I said her name 3 times and she didn't move, I understood something I'd been too selfish to see for 4 years. She hadn't slept, not really slept, since the day the diagnosis came. I carried her inside. She weighed nothing. 29 years old and she weighed nothing, and that fact sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. I laid her down on clean white sheets. I turned to go. I was going to text her supervisor, cover her shift, disappear before she ever knew I was there. But her hand came up in the dark and closed around mine. She wasn't awake. That's the part that still wrecks me. Somewhere in 14 months of holding a dying woman's hand through the worst nights of both their lives, her body had simply forgotten how to let go. So I sat down in the chair beside that bed and told myself I'd wait until she let go. She never did. 6 hours later, she woke up holding my hand, and I woke up a half second after her, and neither of us moved, and neither of us said one word. But here's what I need you to understand before this goes any further. That divorce wasn't a divorce. Not really. And the person who found the loophole, the person who sat at my kitchen table and said the word divorce out loud while her sister listened from the next room, was the same woman now sleeping in that gray uniform with my hand in hers. She's the reason I lost my wife on paper. She's the reason I got to keep her for 18 more months. And in 6 weeks, she's leaving town for good, because of a debt she's been paying in silence that nobody in my family even knows exists. So what did Delaney Prentice do 4 years ago that her own mother will never forgive her for? Why did my ex-wife leave a sealed letter with my name on it that says, "Don't open this until you stop keeping score"? And when Lainey finally let go of my hand that morning, why did she start crying in my kitchen and try so hard to do it quietly? Let me take you back 11 hours. The church smelled like carnations and floor wax. October in Harlow, Ohio, is gray the way a nickel is gray, and the light coming through those windows had no color in it at all. Junie sat on my lap in a black dress her aunt bought her, swinging her feet, asking me in a whisper why they put Mommy in a box, and I had no answer that a 6-year-old could hold. Behind us, my former mother-in-law, Cordelia Prentice, sat with her spine straight as a fence post and did not turn her head 1 inch in my direction. Not once. Not in 90 minutes. And at the very back of that church, by the guest book table, stood Lainey. Gray and white, little collar, a borrowed black cardigan over the top that didn't match anything. She'd washed that uniform at 3 in the morning and hung it over the shower rod because it was the only thing she owned that wasn't wrinkled. And I know that because I found the hanger later. Nobody handed her a plate. Nobody asked her to sit. 200 people came to that funeral, and every single one of them walked past the woman who'd kept Nora alive for 14 months and said, "Thank you so much for organizing this, honey." Honey, like she was staff. She organized the flowers. She fixed Junie's shoelace. She held her mother's elbow when Cordelia's knees went at the graveside. She refilled the coffee at the repast twice. And at 4:45, while a cousin I'd never met was telling a story about Nora in high school, I watched Lainey check her phone, and I watched her face do the math, and I knew exactly what she was about to do. I caught her at the coat rack. You're not going to work. Table 42 needs more ice. Lainey. She wouldn't look at me. She was folding that cardigan like it was the most important task in the state of Ohio. I'm on the schedule, Emmett. You buried your sister 4 hours ago. And she said, God. She said it so calmly. Yeah. That's why I need the shift. That stopped me cold. Because I understood it. There's a certain kind of person who, when the ground opens up under them, does not scream. They pick up a broom. They scrub something. They keep their hands moving because the second their hands stop, the whole thing lands on them at once, and they know they won't survive it. That's who she was. That's who she'd been for 4 years. Let me drive you. My car's right there. Lainey, I lowered my voice. You've been awake since yesterday. She finally looked up at me, and I saw it. The gray under her eyes that wasn't makeup. The way her hands had a small, constant tremor. The fact that she'd lost so much weight, her uniform hung on her like a costume. She said, okay. That was it. One word. And later I'd understand that okay was the sound of a person who has been holding a wall up alone for 14 months and just felt somebody put a hand on it. We drove. She talked. At first, nervous, fast, the way exhausted people do. She told me the funeral home had upcharged for the programs. She told me Junie had asked her if heaven had a hotel and if mommy would have to clean it. She started to say something about the flowers, and then she just stopped, mid-sentence. I glanced over at a red light, and she was gone, head against the window, mouth slightly open. And in her lap, still gripped in both hands, a paper plate of ham and macaroni wrapped in foil that somebody had finally handed her on the way out. Lainey, nothing. Lainey, hey, nothing. Not a flicker. And listen, I've seen tired. I work in a machine shop. I've seen guys pull 3 doubles and fall asleep standing at a press. This wasn't that. This was a body giving up. This was a woman whose system had been running on fumes and fear for 400 and some days, finally getting one quiet moment in a warm car and simply switching off. The light turned green and I sat there. Because I suddenly understood something that made me feel sick. I had spent 4 years being the tragic one. The man who lost his wife on paper. The guy people whispered about at the hardware store. And the whole time, 11 minutes away, this woman had been working nights, driving to Nora's every morning, handling the pills and the insurance calls and the sponge baths and the bedpans and the 3 a.m. panics, and I had never once, not one single time, asked her how she was doing. I'd asked her how Nora was doing, every day, for 14 months. Never her. I drove to her apartment building, 3rd floor walk up on Beach Street, with a buzzer that hasn't worked since the Obama administration, and a landlord who doesn't answer his phone after 6. I said her name 4 more times. I touched her shoulder. She didn't move. I wasn't carrying an unconscious woman up 3 flights to a door I couldn't open. So I turned the car around and I drove to the Weatherly Hotel. Now, I need you to understand something about the Weatherly. It's the nicest building in our county. Marble in the lobby. Gold lamps. A little white marble bust of somebody's dead European relative on a cabinet in the executive suites. It's where the oil lease men stay when they come through, and where people from Columbus stay for weddings. And it is absolutely not where a girl from Beach Street belongs. Lainey had been making those beds for 9 years. I got her inside through the service entrance because I knew the night manager, a decent man named Royce, who happens to also be her brother, which is a whole other story. And I told him she wasn't working tonight, and he took one look at her face and said, Christ, Emmett, has she eaten? He gave me a key to 412, executive suite, vacant, turned down but unbooked. He said, put her in there. If Dorsey asks, I'll handle Dorsey. I carried her. I want to tell you what that was like, because it's the moment everything in my life turned over. She weighed nothing. I'm a big man. I've hauled steel stock my whole adult life, and Delaney Prentice in my arms weighed less than a bag of feed. Her head fell against my shoulder. Her uniform smelled like industrial detergent, and, underneath that, faintly, like the hospice room, that sweet chemical smell that gets in your clothes and won't come out. And halfway down that hallway, with the carpet soft under my boots and those gold sconces going past, I did the math on what I was holding. 29 years old, 14 months of hospice, 9 years of night shifts, and 4 years of being the go-between in a lie that I signed. That's when it hit me in the chest like a dropped anvil. She didn't just help my wife die. She's the one who unmade my marriage. And she did it to save her sister's life. I'll get to that. I promise I'll get to that. But right then, all I did was push the door open with my hip. Room 412. Half-stripped bed. White sheets pulled down. The pillows still stacked. A black lamp with a gold base. Heavy drapes. Everything in that room cost more than her car. I laid her down on the clean side of the mattress. Took her shoes off. Flat black work shoes. Worn through at the heel. One of them with a hole she'd covered from the inside with tape. I pulled a blanket over her. She didn't stir. Not once. And there was 1 second. Where I stood over her and thought about how many hundreds of times she had made this exact bed for strangers. Tucked these corners. Fluffed these pillows. 9 years of preparing beautiful places for other people to rest. And I'd bet everything I own she had never once laid down in a single one of them. I turned to go. I had my phone out. I was going to text Royce, cover her shift, take the stairs, and be gone before she ever knew. And her hand came up out of the dark and caught mine. Not a grab, not a clutch. It was gentler than that, and that's what broke me. It was practiced. It was the movement of somebody who had done it 10,000 times. Fingers finding fingers in a dark room, sliding in, closing. The exact motion you make when you're sitting beside a hospital bed at 3 in the morning and the person in it makes a sound, and you reach out before you're even awake to let them know you're still there. Her eyes never opened. She was not awake. Her body had simply gone looking for a hand the way it had every night for over a year, and mine was the one there. And she said something, barely a breath. She said, "I'm here." Not "are you there?" Not "help." "I'm here." That's what her body said in its sleep, after everything. Still on duty, still reporting for the only job that ever mattered to her. I stood there in the dark of that ridiculous gold and marble room, in my funeral suit, holding the hand of a sleeping housekeeper, and I felt something crack open in me that had been sealed shut since the day I signed those papers. I sat down in the leather chair beside the bed. I told myself, I'll wait until she lets go. She never let go. I sat in that chair, with my arms stretched out across the gap for hours. My shoulder went numb. My neck bent at an angle that would cost me a week of pain. Around 1 in the morning, the housekeeping cart in the hall squeaked past, and I heard someone laughing on their break, and Lainey's hand tightened, and she made a small sound like a child having a bad dream, and without thinking I said, "Hey, you're okay, go back to sleep." And she did, and I broke. I sat in that chair with tears running down my face, silent, so I wouldn't wake her. Because I finally understood what I'd been looking at for 4 years and refusing to see. There is no one on this earth who ever took care of Delaney Prentice. Not her mother, not her sister, not her brother, not me. She was the youngest, and she was the reliable one, and somewhere along the line the whole family made a quiet decision that Lainey was the person things got handed to. And she never complained, not once. Not in 9 years of night shifts, not in 14 months of hospice, not on the day she stood in a church in her work uniform and no one thought to save her a seat. Somewhere in the middle of that night, I stopped being her sister's ex-husband. I don't know what I became instead, but I know it started in that chair. The light came in gray around 6:30, Ohio, October. That light has no mercy in it, and it lay across that white bed and across her face, and I saw her for the first time all night in full. She was so much younger than the last 4 years had made her look. At 2 minutes past 7, her eyes opened. She didn't move. And I felt it before I saw it, her fingers going still in a completely different way. Awake still. She looked at the ceiling, then at the drapes, then, slowly, at the room. And I watched her recognize it. I know this room. I've cleaned this room. And I watched confusion turn into something close to panic. And then she looked down, at her hand, in mine. I was asleep by then, bent forward in that chair like a man praying. I want to be honest with you. I don't know how long she looked at our hands before I woke up. Might have been 10 seconds. Might have been 10 minutes. What I do know is what I saw when my eyes opened. She was looking at me, not at our hands anymore, at my face, and her expression was the most complicated thing I have ever seen on a human being. It was grief and shame and fear and something else underneath all of it that she shoved down so fast I almost missed it. She didn't jerk away. That's what I keep coming back to. She took her hand back slowly, carefully, an inch at a time, the way you'd move if you were trying not to wake somebody up. Except I was already awake. And she knew it. And she did it gently anyway. Neither of us said one word. She got up, straightened her uniform, found her shoes, the one with the tape in it, and put them on facing away from me. And when she finally spoke, her voice came out flat and small and about 80 years old. She said, "You should have just left me in the car. Lainey, I had a shift. Royce covered it." She stopped dead at that. "You told Royce?" "Royce carried the door for me." And that's when her chin started going and she pressed her lips together hard and said, very evenly, "I need a minute." She walked out of that bedroom into the little kitchenette of the executive suite. Those suites have a wet bar, a sink, a coffee station, a fridge that costs more than my truck. And she shut the door partway, and I heard her start to cry. I need you to understand how she cried, because it's the single saddest sound I have ever heard in my life. She was trying to be quiet. She ran the tap. That's what got me. She turned on the faucet so the water would cover the noise, the way a person does in a house where they've learned that their grief is an inconvenience to somebody else. She stood at that sink and sobbed with her hand over her own mouth and the water running. And I sat on the edge of a stranger's bed in a hotel suite, listening to a woman apologize for existing. I went in. She had her back to me, both hands braced on the counter, shoulders going. She said, without turning around, "Don't, Lainey. Please don't be nice to me right now." "Why?" And she turned around. And this is the moment. This is the exact moment the real story starts. And I need you to hear every word of what she said. Her face was wrecked. Her eyes were red. And she said, "Because I'm the reason you're divorced." I said, "You're not." I signed it. I sat at that table, and I signed it. I found it. Her voice broke apart. "Emmett, I found it. I was on a housekeeping cart on the 4th floor at 4 in the morning, with a laptop reading Ohio eligibility rules, and I found the number, and I did the math, and I came to your kitchen, and I said the word out loud, while she was sitting in the next room listening to me say it. To save her life. $900. She was shaking now. That's what it was. $900 a year. Over the limit. Your shop insurance wouldn't touch the protocol she needed, and the state wouldn't cover her, because a married woman's household made $900 too much. Not 9,000. 900. So I sat in your kitchen and told my sister to divorce the man she loved so a computer would let her live. And it worked, I said. Lainey, it worked. We got 18 more months. And she looked at me with the most naked, terrified honesty I have ever seen on another person, and she said, "Then why did I feel something when you signed it?" The tap was still running. Say that again? I can't. She was already reaching for the door. Emmett, I have to go. I have to go. I have to. Lainey, say it again. And she stopped with her hand on the frame, and she didn't turn around, and she said it to the door. For 4 years, I've laid awake asking myself if I found that loophole because it was the only way to save her. Or because some rotten piece of me wanted you two unmarried. Her voice went to nothing. And I will never know. Nobody ever gets to know that about themselves. My mother knows. She's known since the day I said it out loud. That's why she won't look at either of us. She opened the door. So don't be nice to me. Don't drive me anywhere. Don't carry me anywhere. I nursed my sister and I loved her more than my own life, and I still can't prove I was clean about it. And then she left. Left me standing in a hotel kitchenette with a running faucet and a folded blanket, and the shape of her hand still on mine. I didn't go after her. I should have. I've thought about that 100 times since. Instead, I went home, and I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 20 minutes. And then I went inside, and did something I had not done in 11 months. I opened my sock drawer. There's an envelope in there. Cream-colored. Cheap. Legal pad paper folded inside. I can feel it through the front. My name on the outside in Nora's handwriting from back when her hands still worked. And under my name, 5 words. Open when you stop keeping score. She gave it to me in September. From the hospital bed we'd moved into her living room. And she made me promise. And I have picked up that envelope probably 40 times in 11 months and put it back every single time. Because I have been keeping score my entire adult life. Every fight I lost. Every night I chose the shop over my own kitchen. Every mile of that 11-minute drive between my rental and the house where my wife was dying. A drive I made 1,000 times and could not finish, because a caseworker might see my truck. And there is one thing on my scorecard I have never told another living soul. Not Nora, not the pastor, not anybody. There was a week, 1 week, right at the beginning, before we signed, where I could have found another way. Second mortgage, fundraiser, moving states. There was a week, and I didn't push. Because a small, cowardly, unforgivable part of me was relieved to be handed a legal reason to stop living in a house where our son had died. That's the score I keep. So I put the envelope back in the drawer, same as always, closed it, and then my phone lit up on the dresser, a text from Royce, 2 lines. Hey, she okay? She left her card out and didn't clock out. And then, 30 seconds later, also man. I shouldn't say this, but she got another one of those letters at Ma's house. Paragon Medical Recovery. That's like the 4th one. Do you know anything about that? I stood in my bedroom in a suit I'd slept in, and read that name 3 times. Paragon Medical Recovery. Because here's what I hadn't figured out yet, and what would take me another 6 weeks and a scene in a hotel parking lot at 2 in the morning to understand. When you divorce a woman so the state will pay for her treatment, she dies legally single. And when she dies legally single, there's no spouse for the debt to land on. It lands on whoever signed the last set of papers when she was too sick to hold a pen. Junie asked for her on a Tuesday. We were eating cereal for dinner, which is what happens in my house when a man is grieving badly. And she put her spoon down and said, Daddy, can Aunt Lainey come make the pancakes? I said, baby, Aunt Lainey works a lot. But she comes on Sundays. She used to come on Sundays. Why not now? And I sat there across from a 6-year-old who had lost her mother 9 days earlier, holding a spoon, and I could not come up with one single reason a child would accept. So I texted Lainey at 11 at night, which I knew was the start of her shift, and I typed and deleted it 4 times before I sent, Junie wants pancakes Sunday. She asked for you by name. I'm not asking for me. 3 dots. Gone. 3 dots. Gone. 22 minutes later. What time? She came at 9, stood on my porch in jeans and a sweatshirt, which I'd almost never seen her in, holding a grocery bag with buttermilk in it, because she assumed, correctly, that I didn't have any. She didn't look at me. She said, this is for Junie. I said, I know. And then my daughter came around the corner at a dead sprint and hit her at the knees, and I watched Delaney Prentice put a hand on the back of that kid's head and close her eyes and just stand there in my doorway, holding on for about 4 seconds longer than a normal person would. That was the first Sunday. There were 11 of them. I want to tell you about those Sundays, because on paper nothing happened, and in reality, everything did. They made Nora's pancakes. That's the whole ritual. Cast iron pan, buttermilk, a splash of vanilla that Nora always claimed was the secret, and Junie standing on a kitchen chair with a wooden spoon like a small dictator. Every week. Flour on the counter, flour on the floor. Flour, one time, somehow, on the ceiling. And every week, Junie said the same thing after the first bite. They taste like Mom. And every week, Lainey said, that's because they are Mom, and kept her face very still. Here's what I learned across 11 Sundays without ever once asking a direct question. I learned she can do a hospital corner on a bed in 11 seconds flat. I timed her. She stripped Junie's bed one afternoon while the kid was in the bath and remade it before I'd finished folding one towel. And when she caught me watching, she got embarrassed and said, 9 years. It's not a skill, it's a scar. I learned she hasn't been to a doctor for herself since 2020. I learned she has a note on her phone, hundreds of lines long, titled Junie Says, every funny thing my daughter has said since she was 3. Because, she told me, and she said this like it was nothing, somebody should be writing it down now that Nora can't. I learned she takes her coffee black, because milk costs money, and she got out of the habit. And I learned that she flinches at the phone. Every Sunday, sometime between 10 and noon, that phone would buzz face down on my counter, and she would turn it over, and I'd watch the smile go off her face, like somebody flipping a switch, and she'd hit decline, and put it back down, and say something to Junie about the eggs. The fourth Sunday, she went to the bathroom and left it on the counter, and it lit up. Paragon Medical Recovery, 3 missed calls. I stood in my own kitchen looking at another person's phone screen, and I felt like a thief. She came back. She saw me looking. Neither of us said anything. That's how it went for 11 weeks. 2 people being extremely careful in a small kitchen, passing each other the butter, not touching, laughing at Junie and then catching each other laughing and stopping. And I need to be honest about something, because if I'm not honest here, the rest of this story is a lie. I looked forward to Sundays. My wife had been dead for 2 months, and I looked forward to Sundays, and every time I caught myself doing it, I hated myself so completely I could taste it. I'd lie awake Saturday night doing the arithmetic of my own decency. You're not allowed. She's your wife's sister. Nora's been gone 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 11. And I would swear off it, and then 9 o'clock would come, and she'd be on my porch with buttermilk, and my whole chest would come loose. I never said a word, not one. Neither did she. And then, on the 11th Sunday, Cordelia's Buick pulled into my driveway. I saw it through the window over the sink. Lainey was at the stove with her back to the door. Junie was on the chair with the spoon. There was flour everywhere, and the radio was on, and it smelled like every good Sunday morning of my entire marriage. I said, "Lainey." She turned. She looked past me, and the color left her face so fast, I thought she'd go down. Cordelia Prentice did not knock. She has never knocked at a door in her life. She came into my front hall in her church coat with her purse on her forearm, and she stopped, and she looked at the scene in my kitchen, her daughter's sister at her daughter's stove making her daughter's pancakes for her daughter's child in her daughter's ex-husband's house, and I watched a woman's grief turn into a weapon in real time. She said, "Junie, sweetheart, go on and watch your show." Junie, who is 6 but not stupid, looked at me. I nodded. She went. And then Cordelia turned to me and said, in a voice like a closing door, 12 weeks. Cordelia, 12 weeks my daughter has been in the ground. And here you sit. She looked at the flour on the counter, the 2 coffee cups, the cast iron pan. Playing house. She comes for Junie. Oh, I'm sure she does. And then she turned on Lainey, and her voice changed, and it got quieter, which was worse. You want to tell him, Delaney? Or should I? Lainey set the spatula down very carefully on the spoon rest. She said, "Mama, don't. He knows about the papers," Cordelia said. "Everybody knows about the papers. The whole family knows my clever daughter found the loophole. What a smart girl. What a practical girl. You sat at this table." She pointed at my kitchen table, the actual table, right there. "And you told your own sister to divorce her husband, and everybody in this family stood up and applauded you for it. It saved her life," I said. "For 18 months. It came out of her like something tearing. 18 months. And then I buried her anyway. And now I've got a dead daughter, and a live one standing in her kitchen, and I would like somebody in this world to explain to me where the line was." She was crying by then, standing up straight and crying, which is somehow the worst way a person can do it. "Because I have been looking for that line for 4 years, she said, "and I cannot find it." Was it the day you found the rule? Was it the day you drove her to the courthouse? Was it every night of those 2 years you were the one carrying messages between them like some kind of... She stopped herself. Breathed. "You were in that house every single day, Delaney. Every day. And he wasn't allowed to be. And whose idea was that? And Lainey, and this is the part that killed me. This is the part I still see. Lainey did not defend herself. She stood at that stove with her hands at her sides and she took it. Every word, like a person standing in the rain, who has decided they deserve to be wet. Cordelia said the last part almost gently. "You always wanted her life, baby. I saw it when you were 19. and I have spent 4 years praying I was wrong." Then she picked up her purse, and she left. The pancake burned. The smoke alarm went off. I got a dish towel and waved it at the ceiling. And Junie yelled from the living room, asking if we were on fire. And I yelled back that everything was fine. And by the time I turned around, Lainey had her coat on. "Don't," I said. "I have to. Lainey, she's wrong." And she stopped at my front door and looked at me, and she said the thing I wasn't ready for. "She's not." "What?" "She's not wrong, Emmett." Her eyes were dry now, which was somehow worse. "I was 19 when you started coming to Sunday dinners, and I got quiet at that table for a reason. And my mother noticed, because mothers notice." The kitchen clock ticked. I couldn't speak. "I buried it," she said. "I want you to know that. I buried it so deep I didn't look at it for 10 years. I was your wife's sister, and that was all I ever was. And when you two got married, I stood up there in a purple dress, and I meant every bit of it. Lainey," and then she got sick. Her voice cracked wide open. "And I sat on a housekeeping cart at 4 in the morning reading a state statute, and I found a number, and I cannot tell you. Emmett, I swear to God, I cannot tell you what was in my heart when I found it. I've tried. I've spent 4 years trying. And every night of those 14 months, I sat in that room holding her hand, and I asked myself the same question until it made me sick." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, fast, like it was an inconvenience. "So you being kind to me is the worst thing that could happen to me right now. Because I don't get to have it. Do you understand? I gave up the right to have it the day I opened my mouth in your kitchen." And she left. 11 Sundays, and then nothing. Winter came the way it does in Ohio. All at once. Mean. Gray. I went back to the shop. I made Junie's lunches. I answered the school when they called about her crying at recess. I got through Thanksgiving at my own mother's house, and Christmas with a tree I bought at a gas station lot at 9 p.m. on the 23rd. Lainey texted about Junie. "That's it. Short, polite, unbearable. Tell her I said hi. Give her a hug from me. Once, is she sleeping better?" She stopped coming for 4 months. And on the fridge, that whole winter, there was a crayon drawing. Junie made it in December. 4 stick figures holding hands. She labeled them, in that enormous, careful kindergarten handwriting, Daddy, Emmy, Mom, in heaven. And the 4th one, Aunt Lainey. I could not take it down. I tried twice. Junie turned 7 in February. Lainey didn't come, but at 8 in the morning a package showed up on my porch. No return address, and inside was a book. I have to try to describe this book. It was a scrapbook, and it was maybe 4 inches thick, and it was Nora. All of her. Baby pictures I'd never seen. Her at 11 with a fish. Her at 17 in a marching band uniform. Our wedding, including 3 photos I didn't know existed, taken from the side, of me looking at her. Ticket stubs. A pressed flower from the funeral. The hospital bracelet from the day Junie was born. And next to it, the hospital bracelet from the last admission. And handwriting. Pages and pages of Nora's own handwriting, from before, birthday cards, grocery lists, a note that said back at 6, "Don't let the dog on the couch," all cut out and saved and pasted in. Somebody had been collecting scraps of my wife's handwriting for years, so my daughter would grow up knowing what her mother's letters looked like. There was one line on the first page, in Lainey's writing. "Junie, everything I could find. Love, your aunt." I stood on my porch in February and cried like a kid, and then I drove to the Weatherly at 2 in the morning. I told the front desk I was there for Royce. I wasn't. I went down the service corridor on the 4th floor because I knew that's where the carts stage, and I turned the corner, and I stopped. She was asleep, sitting up. On the floor, back against the wall, next to a loaded housekeeping cart, chin down, still holding a folded towel, that fluorescent light buzzing. The whole hall smelling like bleach and carpet shampoo. 2 in the morning, and a woman asleep on a hallway floor between rooms. And on top of the cart, next to the little sprayer bottles, sitting there folded in thirds, was an envelope with the window in it. I want to say I didn't read it. I read it. Paragon Medical Recovery, LLC. Regarding Prentice, Nora J. Balance. $41,206.18. And down the bottom, in the box marked Responsible Party, Prentice, Delaney R. I don't remember waking her. I remember her eyes opening and going straight to my hand, to the letter in my hand. And I remember her face. She got up fast. She said, "Give me that. Laney, Emmett, give it to me." We went out to the loading dock because she wouldn't have it inside. February in Ohio at 2 in the morning, and she came out in her uniform with no coat, arms crossed, breath fogging, absolutely refusing to shiver in front of me. I said, $41,000. It's handled. On $16.40 an hour. It is handled. Explain it to me. And she blew up. Finally, 4 years of it came out on a concrete loading dock behind a hotel. You want it? Fine. The state paid for the protocol. The state did not pay for the out-of-network scans, or the 2 ambulance rides, or the 11 days at the Cleveland facility when the protocol stopped working, or the last round they tried that wasn't approved. That's $41,000 of anyway. Emmett, anyway. After all of it. Her voice was going ragged. And she was legally single. That was the whole point. That was the beautiful, clever thing I found. So when she died, there was no spouse for it to land on. It lands on the estate, and the estate is a 9-year-old Corolla and $800, and it lands on whoever signed. And you signed. She was in and out. Her chin was going. It was the 3rd week of August. They needed a responsible party for the last round, or they wouldn't start it. Her hands didn't work anymore, Emmett. She couldn't hold the pen, and they were standing there with a clipboard, and she looked at me. She stopped, breathed. She begged me not to. That's the truth. She looked right at me and said, "Laney, don't you dare." And I waited until she fell asleep and I signed it anyway. Jesus. So don't you look at me like that. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, furious about it. I bought her 19 days. That's what $41,000 got. 19 days, and I'd do it again tomorrow. The wind came across that dock. She still wouldn't shiver. I said, "I'm paying it." "No. Laney, that's my daughter's mother's debt. That's not how debt works. That's not how families work." And she said, very quietly, "You and me aren't family. Not anymore." That's the whole thing I did, remember? I made us not family. I didn't have anything for that. She looked at the parking lot, and then she told me the rest, and it was worse. "There's a job," she said. "Asheville, big resort, housekeeping supervisor, days, 60 cents more an hour, but it's live-in. Staff housing, no rent, no utilities, no car payment because there's a shuttle. Laney, do you know what my rent is? $940. That's $11,000 a year I could put on this." She turned to face me. 6 weeks. I start the 2nd week of April. I already told Dorsey. 6 weeks? I have 4 years of this, Emmett. 4 years if I'm lucky, and nothing breaks. Or I go down there and it's 2. Her voice went almost gentle, which was unbearable. It's the only math that works. I've done it 100 times. There's no other version. There's a version where you let me help you. There isn't. Why not? And she looked at me for a long moment on that freezing loading dock with the vending machines humming behind her, and she said, "Because if I let you help me, I'd have to let you be kind to me. And if I let you be kind to me for 4 years, I would fall in love with you, and then my mother would be right about me forever." The wind, the hum, her breath in the air. "And I would rather owe $41,000, she said, than prove her right." Then she went back inside. I stood on that dock for 10 minutes, and then I drove home in the dark and did the only thing I could think of, which was call her brother. Royce came over the next night with a 6-pack he didn't open. County garage jacket. Big tired guy. He sat at my kitchen table, that table, and listened to the whole thing, and when I finished, he rubbed his face with both hands. "Ma's not wrong that it's fast," he said. "I know, but Ma's wrong about who it's fast for." He looked up. "Emmett, that girl hasn't slept in 4 years. She's not chasing anything. She's just the last one standing." I didn't say anything. Then he said, "You know what Nora told me? September, right before the end." "What?" She said Laney was going to hollow herself out, and there wouldn't be anybody left to stop her. He turned the beer can a half circle on the table. I said, "What do you want me to do about it?" And she said, "Nothing. I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" Royce shrugged. "You know Nora. She always had a notebook. And I sat there in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, and I thought about an envelope in my sock drawer. Cream-colored, cheap, legal pad paper folded inside. Open when you stop keeping score. And I thought about who wrote the words on that legal pad. Because by September, my wife's hands didn't work anymore. By September, somebody else was holding the pen. I didn't open it that night. I want you to know that. Because it matters. I sat on the edge of my bed with that envelope in both hands until almost 2 in the morning, and I put it back. Because Nora didn't write open when you're sad. She didn't write open when you're ready. She wrote open when you stop keeping score. And I was still keeping score. God help me, I was still keeping score at 2 in the morning in an empty house. So instead, over the next 5 weeks, I did something I've never done in my life. I went looking for the thing I was most afraid of. I called the county benefits office and asked for the 2021 file. I sat in a plastic chair for an hour and a half, and a woman named Ms. Vance pulled it up and turned her monitor toward me. And there it was. The income worksheet, the household calculation, the line at the bottom. $960 over 4 years. I'd carried that number as a story somebody told me. Seeing it on a county screen in a beige office with a broken vending machine outside was something else entirely. I said, "Was there another way?" Ms. Vance was kind about it. She said, "Sir, that number is the number. There's no appeal for being over. What if I'd taken a second mortgage? Sold the house? Assets count too. It would have made it worse. What if we'd moved states?" She looked at me over her glasses. "With a stage 3 diagnosis and a treatment already scheduled? Sir, you'd have lost her waiting on residency." I sat in my truck in that parking lot for 20 minutes. Because I had spent 4 years privately convinced that if I'd fought harder in that 1 week, if I'd pushed, if I'd found another road, my wife and I would have stayed married, and she'd have died in my arms, with my ring on her hand. There was no other road. There was never another road. The only thing my cowardice cost me that week was my own peace of mind, and I had been charging Lainey Prentice for it in my head for 4 years. That was the first thing that came off the scorecard. The second one came harder. The last week of March, I did the other thing I'd been avoiding since October. I went to Cordelia's house. She opened the door and looked at me like a bill she wasn't going to pay. I said, "I need 20 minutes, then I'll go." She let me stand in the entryway. Wouldn't offer a chair. Fine. I told her about the county office. The $960. Ms. Vance. No appeal, no other road, assets count too. You'd have lost her waiting on residency. Cordelia's face didn't move. So I told her the rest. I told her that in those 2 years, I sat in the Weatherly parking lot at 2 in the morning 9 separate times while her daughter was being admitted. Because a husband-looking man at a bedside is a red flag on a file. I told her about the Christmas concert where I sat on the visitor's side of the gym and watched my wife 200 feet away, and we didn't wave. I told her that Lainey drove Junie back and forth between 2 houses for 2 years so that a caseworker doing a drop-in would never see one family. And then I told her the part nobody knew. The last night, I said. Cordelia, September 29th. Her hand went to the doorframe. I was in the driveway. I'd been in the driveway since 8. And at 11 o'clock, Lainey came out and got me, and said it doesn't matter anymore. Come inside. And I said, what if somebody sees? And she said, my voice went, and I let it. She said, Emmett, let them. Cordelia was looking at the floor. I got to hold my wife's hand for 4 hours because your daughter Delaney decided the rules didn't matter anymore. And she stood in the hallway the whole time to give us the room. Silence in that entryway. The furnace kicked on somewhere. Cordelia said, very quietly, I didn't know that. No, ma'am. Because she doesn't tell people things. And then I said the last of it. She's leaving in 2 weeks. Asheville. Live-in staff housing. I put the collections letter on her hall table. That's why. Cordelia picked it up. Read it. Read the responsible party box, and that proud, hard, grieving woman put her hand over her mouth and made a sound I hope I never hear again. 41,000. She's been paying it since November on $16.40 an hour and telling nobody. She never said, "No, ma'am," I said. She never does. I left her standing in her own front hall holding that letter. 2 days later, Royce called me and said, "What did you say to Ma?" Why? Because she called me at 6 in the morning and asked how much I could put in. We worked it out at his kitchen table on a legal pad, 3 of us, Royce, me, and Cordelia, who sat with her purse on her lap and did not apologize for anything, because that's not how she's built, but who wrote a number down and slid it across the table and said, "That's what I've got monthly." "Don't tell her it was me." Royce said, "Ma, she's gonna know." Cordelia said, "Then don't tell her twice." 18 months. That's what the 3 of us could do it in. 18 months, and nobody moves to Asheville. And I still hadn't opened the envelope. The second week of April came. She had a moving truck. Not even a truck. A 15-foot rental with her whole life in it, which took 2 hours to load because there wasn't much. She came by on a Saturday morning to say goodbye to Junie. That took an hour and 10 minutes, and it wrecked both of them. Junie asked if Asheville was farther than heaven. Lainey said, "No, baby, it's a lot closer than that, and I can call you on the phone." Junie asked if she could come. Lainey said someday. Junie asked when someday, and Lainey couldn't answer. And my 7-year-old, who had already lost one woman that year, put both hands on Lainey's face and said, "Don't be gone." I had to leave the room. When I came back, Lainey was at my front door with her keys out and her jaw set like a woman about to do something with a knife, and I had the envelope in my hand. She stopped dead, because she recognized the paper. Legal pad, yellow, blue lines. I said, 10 minutes. Emmett, Lainey. I held it up. It's her handwriting on the front, but by September her hands didn't work, so somebody was holding the pen for her that whole month. Everything went out of her face. "Was it you?" "Emmett, I don't know what's in there." She had me write 11 letters that month. She'd say them, and I'd write them, and she'd fold them herself. She never let me read the ones she folded. "Then let's find out together. That's your letter. It says open it when I stop keeping score." I looked at her. "I went to the county office, Lainey. There was no other road. There was never another road. There's nothing left on my card." Her hand came up over her mouth. "There's still one on yours," I said. "So let's open it." We sat on my front steps. April in Ohio, that thin, unconvinced sunlight. The neighbor's forsythia, going yellow. A dog barking 2 streets over. Junie inside, watching cartoons. The moving truck at the curb, with the engine ticking. I opened it. 2 pages. The first one was Nora's own writing. Shaky, sloped, going downhill across the line. But hers. From before September. She must have written it while she still could, and held on to it. I read it out loud, because my hands weren't steady enough to hold it and read it at the same time. "Emmett, if you're reading this, you finally put the scorecard down. So I'm going to keep this short, because you never could sit still. I need you to hear this from me and not from your own head. Because your own head is a liar, and always has been. It worked. Do you hear me? It worked. 18 months. I watched Junie learn to read. I watched her lose a tooth. I sat in a gym and watched her sing a Christmas song. And yes, I saw you across that gym. And yes, I knew exactly why you couldn't wave. And I have never in my life been so proud of a man for sitting still. So don't you dare stand at my grave and call it a mistake. I know about the week, the one before we signed. I know you didn't push. I've known since it happened. Emmett, I didn't want you to push. I was so tired and I wanted somebody to hand me an answer, and you let it be handed to us, and I have never held it against you for 1 second. I'm forgiving you for something you didn't do, but I know you need it in writing. So there it is, in writing. Forgive me for leaving. Not the dying, the divorce. I said yes to it in about 9 seconds. I've thought about that a lot. The marriage ending was not a failure. 2 people got in the water and swam different directions to save the same thing. Be happy, you idiot. And tell Junie that Grandma Ruth invented the pancakes. I lied about that for 11 years, and it's the only thing on my conscience. I got to the end of that, and I couldn't see. Lainey had both hands over her face. Then I turned to the second page, and I stopped, because it wasn't Nora's handwriting. It was neat, small, slanted right, careful. It was Lainey's. I said, "Lainey." She looked, and I watched her recognize her own hand on a page she did not remember writing. No, that's wrong. She remembered writing it. She just never knew what it was. She said, "Oh no." "Oh no, she didn't. Read it." "I can't." "Read it out loud." "Lainey, she made you write it in your own hand, for a reason." And she took that page in both shaking hands and read her own handwriting, out loud, on my front steps. "Lainey, I know. I have known since you were 19 years old and you got quiet at Mama's table. I watched it happen across a bowl of green beans, and I never said one word, and neither did you, for 10 years. I'm making you write this yourself, so you can't ever tell yourself I was too sick to mean it. That's your handwriting. Look at it. You did not take one single thing from me. You gave me 14 months of your life. You worked all night and came to me all day, and you never once, not one time, made me feel like a burden. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand that you are the only person in my entire life who took care of me without ever letting me feel it? I know what you ask yourself at night. Stop it. Even if there was a piece of you that wanted it. Lainey, so what? You are allowed to be a person. Wanting a thing and doing a wrong thing are not the same, and you have never in your life done the wrong thing. So here is the only thing I have left to give anybody. Permission. Not in a year. Not after some polite amount of time that makes the neighbors comfortable. Now, take care of my girl. She's going to need a woman who knows what her mother's handwriting looked like. Let him take care of you. He's not good at it yet. Make him learn. And Lainey, sleep, please. For God's sake, baby, sleep. She got to the last line and her voice was gone. She sat on my front steps in April, holding a page in her own handwriting that told her she was allowed, and she came apart the way a person does when a door they've been leaning against for 4 years finally opens. I didn't touch her. I sat there and let her. And when she could talk again, the first thing she said was, "She made me write it. She made me write it so I couldn't argue." Yeah, she knew. She was laughing and crying at the same time. Emmett, she knew the whole time. 10 years. She knew everything. She always did. And then Lainey looked up at the moving truck at the curb, and back at the paper, and she said, "I don't know how to stop." Stop what? Working. Owing. Any of it. Emmett, I don't know how to be a person who isn't paying somebody back. And I said, "Then let us teach you." Slow. She stared at me. So I told her about Cordelia. The hall table. The number on the legal pad. Royce's kitchen. 18 months. 3 people. And Delaney Prentice, who had absorbed a funeral, a mother's accusation, and $41,000 without breaking, heard that her mother had put money down for her and folded straight over her own knees and sobbed on my front steps. She did not go to Asheville. Here's how it actually went, because I want to tell you the true version and not the movie version. She took the day shift supervisor job at the Weatherly instead. Same building, 9 years, first time she ever saw those rooms in sunlight. She moved into Royce's spare room, not mine, and we did it slow. Painfully, ridiculously, small town slow. Because if we were going to do it at all, we were going to do it where every person in Harlow, Ohio, could watch us do it right. We didn't touch for 3 months. 3 months of Sundays and pancakes and me walking her to Royce's truck like a teenager. The first time I kissed her it was July and we were arguing about a lawnmower. The debt took 19 months, not 18, because her transmission went in month 7. Every month she tried to argue about her share and every month she lost. Cordelia never once said the word sorry in her entire life. But that August, she came to the house with a wooden recipe box under her arm. Nora's recipe box, and she put it in Lainey's hands and said, "The pancakes are Ruth's, but you'll want the pot roast." That was the apology. It was enough. Both of them knew it was enough. Junie started calling her Lainey Mom about a year in. Nobody taught her that. Nobody asked her to. She just came in the kitchen one morning and said, "Lainey Mom, where's my shoe?" And Lainey had to walk out of the room and stand in the garage for a minute. We told Junie the truth about all of it. When she was old enough. About the papers, the $960, the parking lot, the driveway on September 29th. She's 14 now. She keeps that scrapbook on the shelf over her bed, and the crayon drawing is still on my refrigerator. And yes, it's still labeled Aunt Lainey. And no, we are never fixing the spelling. But the day I actually think about, the day I'd pick if I could only keep one, is a Sunday in May. Nothing happened that day. That's the point. I came in from mowing the yard, and the house smelled like butter. Junie was asleep on the living room floor, with a cartoon still going, full of syrup. And on the couch, in a square of sunlight coming through the front window, Delaney Prentice was out cold with a dish towel still in her hand. Asleep, in the daytime, on purpose, in a house with nothing in it to be afraid of. I stood in my own doorway with grass on my boots, and I have never in my life been so undone by the sight of somebody sleeping. So I sat down in the chair across from her, the same chair I'd hauled home from a hotel room memory in my head 100 times. And she came up halfway, the way you do, not really awake, and she reached out without opening her eyes, and found my hand, and took it. The first time she held my hand, she was so tired she didn't know she was doing it. That was a body still standing watch over a sister who was already gone. This time she knew. I didn't ask her to marry me that day. I asked her in October, on the anniversary, at Nora's grave, with Junie holding the ring in both hands, like it might fly away. Lainey said yes before I finished the sentence, and then said, "Wait, go back, say the rest," and made me start over from the beginning while she cried into her sleeve. But that Sunday in May, in the chair, in the light, watching a woman finally sleep, that was the day I stopped keeping score. There's a question I've carried ever since, and I'd like to hand it to you now, because I think most of us are living somewhere inside it. Delaney Prentice spent 4 years convinced she was a bad person, not because of anything she did, but because of something she felt and never acted on. She saved her sister's life. She gave up her 20s. She never once crossed a line. And she still couldn't forgive herself, because she couldn't prove her own heart was clean. So here's what I want to ask you. Is a person good because of what they feel, or because of what they do with it? And the harder half of that question, the one I think you already know the answer to. Who in your life has been quietly carrying something for years, doing everything right, waiting for somebody to tell them they're allowed to put it down? And have you ever actually told them? Somebody in your life is Lainey. Somebody is doing the night shift of your family, and nobody has thanked them by name in years. Call them. Not text. Call them. And if this story reached you, if you saw somebody you love in it, or if you saw yourself, do me one favor. Tap that notification bell before you go and turn it on, because these stories only find the people who need them when you do. Tell me in the comments, who is the Lainey in your life? Say their name. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.